Welcome to Humble Beginnings, a podcast where we uncover the unconventional, more relatable paths to success. In this show, we'll share the stories before the C-suites, board memberships, and appointments, the stories of various upbringings, first jobs, career pivots, educational uncertainties, and more. This is the place to hear about their lives from the GovCon executives themselves. We hope you enjoy. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Humble Beginnings. I'm your host, Amanda Ziede, and our guest today is Anna Sever, President and CEO of Magellan Federal. Thank you for being on the show today, Anna, and for being willing to share your story with us.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Awesome. Me too. So I want to start by learning a bit about your background. I understand that you grew up in North Carolina as a minister's child. So tell us a bit more about your childhood and what your family was like.
Yeah, so very humble beginnings, truly, to use your catchphrase. My father was a Presbyterian minister. My mom at the time, although educated, was a stay-at-home mom. And then my father got sick and died of cancer. And with that, my mom had to figure out how to support the family and also how to figure out where we would live, because as a minister's family, we lived in the church manse. So all at once, I watched my mother go from kind of being I would say the social coordinator of the church and of my father's life to being the primary breadwinner and taking over everything. And it impressed upon me always as a young child that hard work is fundamental to everything you do, as well as to always be looking down the road a little bit and be prepared for roadblocks that you may not have anticipated. Because I think, the lesson that I learned from watching her is she took on a tremendous amount during a really formidable time for my brother and I. My brother was a teenager. I was a preteen. Not the easiest times to take on, going back to school and getting a teaching certificate and trying to find a job and to support your family.
Yeah, absolutely. Did that kind of change your perspective about resilience and having to watch your mother take on those roles?
It really changed my perspective on resilience, as well as just that commitment to sometimes you just have to knuckle down and do the hard work and get it done. And it may be exhausting, but if that's what the situation calls for, you have to do it because people are depending on you. And I think the other thing that I learned and had a much greater appreciation for later in life is people do the best they can at that moment in time. And we can all sit back and do armchair quarterbacking and criticizing. But under really difficult circumstances, it's amazing to see what people can do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, losing a parent at such a young age and having to sort of restructure the family dynamic and your mom taking on those roles couldn't have been easy. So how did those early experiences change perhaps how you navigated middle school and high school while you were in those years?
I think I became an adult at the age of 11. In some ways, but very much not an adult in other ways. As I watched my mom work really, really hard, I was like, I can work at least as hard, if not harder. And so, I started babysitting at a young age. I started my first job where I got a W-2 when I was 14. And I was going to do whatever I could do to help participate in supporting myself, at least so I could pay for all my extracurriculars. My mom was never one to have us want, but she was a penny pincher to the nth degree. And I remember in high school having many conversations about the difference between a need versus a want. And I find myself having those conversations even now. Is this a need versus a want? So it has carried forward into my business life as well.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. I mean, I think the way we grew up definitely influences the way that we manage our lives and money and all those things today. So that makes sense. Tell us about your first job, though, that you mentioned and what that experience taught you.
Oh, my first job was at a community swimming pool. And this, of course, is in the South, and I won't say the date because that will age me. But it was a long, long time ago. And I taught swim lessons to all ages. And then within the first year, I started it in the summer. they discovered that I had a knack for talking to adults. So they were like, we need you to take over the police officers' swim class. I did not realize there were policemen that did not know how to swim. And so, no pun intended, thrown into the deep end of teaching these people that are, taller in stature and life to me, the basics and fundamentals of putting their face in the water. So it was a very humbling experience because something that was so second nature to me, I realized these people that are in the position of keeping me safe did not understand. And so I had to share my skills and knowledge with them. So I think it also, that impressed upon me that things are not hierarchical in life. It is, there's a codependence that we all need each other. And I started to shape my framework of leadership really being a participatory leader.
That must have been a humbling experience for the police officers as well. And working with adults at such a young age as well. I mean, that level of maturity must have come about pretty early on, especially police officers.
And there were, I hate to say this because again, this will tell you the time of life. There were racial undertones that were swimming around at that time, and probably one of the most impactful officers said, "You realize this is odd for me to be being taught by you." And I said, "And it's just as odd for me to be teaching you. So let's just learn together." And I was like,
right.
And it was a very humbling experience.
I bet. Yeah, lots of elements around that time, I'm sure.
Yes,
So,
I mean, this was the time where there were two community pools, and when I graduated at the age of 15 and a half to being able to be a lifeguard, you rotated which pool you served, and it was a very different experience. And I don't think I realized that at the time, but
right.
when I remember being in college and thinking, oh my goodness, I was part of something that I thought our country had passed on and had moved away from, that it was very live in my upbringing.
That is a very unique experience and perspective, I bet, especially as you reflect. It's harder to see things when you're in them. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just doing my job. It was my rotation job. So,
Wow. Well, you received your first W-2 at 14, so that is also an unusual experience. But I understand that you went on to study psychology at Davidson College and receive your Master of Social Work from USC. So, what drew you to this field of education, and what were your initial goals with these degrees?
well, and when I went to Davidson, I had no clue what I wanted to do. But I mean, that just flat out. And Davidson was a liberal arts college, and I had a very lovely high school AP teacher mentor who said, I think you really need to go to a liberal arts college to try and figure out what you want to do. So she helped steer me that. So again, just being willing to listen to her. I detested her class. I really detested her class, but I really honored her advice and the fact that she took time to say, I think you'll do better if you go down this road. And boy, was she right, because when I got to Davidson, I took every class and I quickly learned I will not be a physicist, but gravitated to psychology and developed, again, a close bond, which is alive today, with my psychology mentor. And he was like, you can go down this road and there are a whole bunch of different ways you can find to help people. And that was kind of the thing that was driving me, is like, I think the impact of my early childhood, I wanted to help people. I wanted to do something to make it a little bit easier for some other kids somewhere down the road. So went into psychology, had the great mentor who said, you could do something really unusual. You could do a thesis in undergrad. And I'm like, I thought people did theses in grad school. And he goes, well, you could do it in undergrad. It'd be a great experience. So I said yes, which now I still keep in touch with him. I'm like, Cole, boy, did you railroad me into that. But again, a fabulous experience for me that opened me up. I got to go to professional conferences and present, and I met all these different people. And I realized I really didn't want to do what the traditional psychologist did, which was at that point 60-minute hours, classic kind of therapy, what I would call now the worried well. I really wanted to work with folks that had access issues, that couldn't get services, that had been victims of some of the most horrific abuse and neglect, or who had severe mental illness. And so, again, talking to mentors, they were like, you might want to go down the role of social work. That's going to probably fit your style, your framework. So ended up going to graduate school in social work. And again, I'm working. I worked all through college. I worked through grad school. I got a fellowship, and then you have to do your rotations. And so I'm like, well, if I'm going to be working, I might as well get paid. So I found there were 2 paid internships anywhere in the University of South Carolina at the time. And I found one of them, and it was with the Administration for Health and Finance Services Commission in state government. And I went and worked with them and started working on this thing that I'd never heard of, which were called Medicaid state plans, and opened up my world, because now I started understanding how money flowed from the federal government to the state government, from the state government to services. And again, it was literally happenstance that I fell into that. And I will share a little bit of my obnoxious personality traits. When I was at USC, I went to the dean after about 4 months, and I said, I don't think I'm being challenged enough. And he said, what do you mean you're not being challenged enough? I said, well, I'm not working as hard as I did in undergraduate. And so he pulls open my folder and he looks at it and he said, well, you went to Davidson. I said, yes. And he goes, well, that's a problem. And I said, that's not a problem. That's a badge of honor. And he said, well, you probably had to work a lot harder at Davidson than you did here, just the standards. And I was like, well, then I'm telling you, I want harder standards. So, I don't know. I actually said to him, I'm not getting my money's worth. And
Wow.
so, yeah, talk about learning to be an advocate very early on, not necessarily as diplomatically as I should have. So that's a lesson I learned. But he's like, well, why don't you do a minor in public administration? So I'm like, okay, fine. Who do I go talk to? So I'll go talk to him and I'll do a minor in public administration. So, I sometimes didn't know better when to keep my mouth shut in terms of advocating for myself. And in some ways that allowed me some of my greatest growth opportunities as I came along in my work.
That's so interesting. I mean, your work ethic clearly came on very early. I don't think I asked for more work in college, so that's no matter what my workload was like.
And there was a huge difference between the workload at Davidson and at USC. And I think because I worked so hard, and I did do a thesis undergrad, which was so unusual,
Crazy,
that I was, kudos to my undergraduate. I was overprepared going into graduate school. So I was like, bring it on, give me more. I'll take it. So
yeah, the note you made of becoming an adult at about 11 makes sense. Checks
yeah.
out for this part of the of the story.
Well, and I started looking for my job before probably about, I want to say December, January, during my last year of graduate school. I was like, okay, I got to have the next plan. I got to have it all lined up, and started going to national social work conferences and meeting state government folks, because I decided I kind of like what I'm doing with this Health and Human Services Finance Commission, so I should parlay this into a job. And met a gentleman doing a conference presentation again. So always take those opportunities. And he said, we need people like you in Idaho. And Idaho, I probably had to look at a map to tell you where it really was at the time. And I'm like, I'm young. They need people. This sounds like fun. Okay, I'll pack up my car. And he was like, well, we really need you to start in early May. And I'm like, well, technically I don't graduate till late May, but I think I can get all my work done and I can start technically before I graduate. So that was how I did it.
Oh my gosh. So you finished all your work before graduation, went to Idaho, and still wow.
Yeah. And then I was honored with the outstanding social work student, but I didn't get the award till after I already started my work.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah. So that the working hard has never been anything I've shied from.
Yeah, it seems that way. And I mean, I don't know for sure, but I can't imagine entering state government in this field is necessarily financially lucrative. So to have this passion must be something that you inherently really wanted to do and cared for. So
yeah, I started out as a child welfare supervisor in a small office. I think I wrote in my narrative that had never had a female supervisor, much less a female supervisor who had just moved from across the country, who really didn't know anything about the area. So I had to again show some humility to say, okay, you all know your area. You know your leaders. I need to learn your leaders. But I also had to be pretty firm in that, no, I'm taking the helm and I'm going to hold you accountable. And there were a lot of, looking back, there were a lot of really interesting pushbacks, some gender based, some religious based. I was navigating a world that I had no idea I was going to
Wow.
walk into that. And I again was fortunate in that probably within about 6 weeks of starting, they sent me to a training in Boise, and I got to meet the head of the Division of Family and Community Services, very impressive woman. And I glommed onto her. I mean, just glommed. I saw, I'm like, oh, mentor capabilities. Let me reach out. Let me get to know you. I'm dealing with some really bizarre things. I need a strong female who can help mentor me. And started developing that relationship. I don't know that I was conscious that that's what I was doing, but I was definitely doing that, because I don't think I would have made it through some of the pushback that I experienced and some of the societal norms that I was breaking, for this small office.
Hmm. How did you take the learnings from your mentor back with you and respond to those, tough challenges?
Yeah, I think part of it was keep my eye on the mission, try and eliminate the noise, because a lot of that pushback is noise. People are, and they need to keep their eye on the mission. So if I go back to what the fundamental mission of the organization is and what your job is, then whether or not you like being supervised by a female is neither here nor there. It is. And so the less I engaged on those topics, the more I was able to refocus on the mission. And so she was really crisp in terms of, she had been spending a lot of time frameworking and literally documenting the mission of the organization, because she felt like there were problems across the state. And I was like, I can use what you're doing and make it meaningful in my day-to-day supervision with folks. And I also did, I took on call just like everybody else. It's like, if I'm going to ask you to do something, I will never ask you to do something that I myself will not do, so that I could earn people's respect, quite frankly. And, did on call, had my first horrific child fatality, and all of those things fed into helping me learn to be supportive and to help those folks grow. And in some cases, help them grow out of the organization, because they were burned. They had been burned out for 20 years and nobody knew it.
Wow. It's also crazy that you can be a 14-year-old girl teaching police officers how to swim and experience gender bias years later as a supervisor, a professional,
Yeah.
with a master's degree in your field. So it's like it never doesn't matter when and where.
No, it doesn't matter when and where. And I do think that because I was so focused on hard work, that it was like it would bug me, but it wouldn't totally shut me down, because it was just like, well, that's just another obstacle I will have to step over and
It's an
step
awesome
over it I shall.
mentality.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. And so I think if I had allowed it to permeate more of who I was as a person, I would have never gotten where I am. And I try to tell folks that, that's one of the things, you asked, what do I tell other folks, is, and particularly young up and coming folks, is focus on the hard work and the mission, and the noise will bother you, but figure out where to put it so it doesn't overtake you. And that's, I think, is really crucial to success.
Absolutely. And I know you mentioned um, some key moments during your career at in the state government, but were there some particularly notable turning points, um, that kind of helped progress your personal and or professional career, or just kind of altered the way things came about? I don't know,
Yeah, I
things that
think
were notable.
again is making those contacts with mentors. And then my mentor's mentor said, we need to go out and we need to do a road show, and we need to do negotiated rulemaking, and we need people in the field. And so I'm like, I'll do it. I had no idea what any of the words were that she had just said to me, but I was like, I'll volunteer, because that'll teach me more. I'll learn more. I'll get to see more. And so I got to do this entire road show, going from office to office, every corner of the state of Idaho, where we talked to people about what was going on in child welfare. And I got to be in the car with the department head of the Department of Health and Human Services and with my mentor at that time. So I got great car time. I got great feedback in terms of, these are things you're doing really well. And what do you want to do in the next step of your career? And lo and behold, they're like, we need somebody to be over child welfare at the state level. Anna, would you be interested? You seem to be enjoying this. So it's like, I put myself out there and then I had an opportunity. And so went and worked really hard, took that opportunity, and lo and behold, another 18 months, they're like, well, we have somebody that we need to take over all of family and children's services. So I take that. So like every 18 months, because I was willing and I was leaning forward into my career and doing work and not staying in my little silo. I mean, I wouldn't say I was an amoeba and I was in everybody else's business, but I was constantly trying to learn about the entire organization versus just my piece of it. And, so I just kept growing until finally I realized the next question they said was, would you like to be a political appointee? And I'm like, how do you do that? This is not, it's like, I think the answer is yes, but what does that mean? I mean, literally, I was so naive. And there's like, well, you have to go meet with the governor and that he will appoint you and you serve at the pleasure of the governor. And I'm like, well, I haven't done that before. So, you take on this whole new role. And so it was like, okay, sure, I'll do that. And had a very lovely experience of being put on task force where I got to interact with the federal government. I helped the federal government write their first child fatality review legislation due to the work that we had done in Idaho based on child fatalities that had occurred. And so again, it kind of broadened my scope from state government to federal government to what other states were doing. And I took those advantages. And then I came to a critical point where I had 2 children and it was time for me to start thinking about education. And I had learned enough about the state of Idaho, having been a political appointee, that the education system was not good. And so I'm looking at the educational needs of my children, and I'm on this political trajectory. And I said, I need to make a change. I need to figure out how I can move back east and pick a school district so that my kids will have good schooling. So I made a strategic decision and left state government and went to work with private contractors so that I literally could write an RFP to win business to move to a part of the country where there were better educational systems, and I would go run that business. And that's what we did.
You made it happen. Yep.
I made it happen and was very fortunate because then that allowed me to grow within the federal and the state contracting business and win a lot of business in the state contracting. And then from there, parlayed it into the federal contracting business, where I spent 12 years at Maximus growing the federal healthcare book of business, and had lovely, and really smart people that I worked with at Maximus. But also, I think this was one of the lessons that I learned is you also have to realize when you've done everything that is interesting to you still, and if you're starting to lose the drive and the interest to learn something new in an organization, it's time for you to leave and to let somebody else come in. And I was getting to that point where it was like, yeah, I could do it. I could keep doing it. But I was losing the spark. And so made the decision to leave and, left, did my cooling off period because of non-competes. And then Magellan started calling. And when they started calling, I'm like, oh my, this is it. This is the combination of both my avocation and my vocation finally coming together at one place in my life. And I was like, this is the job I want. And I literally, I remember after I got off the phone call with the recruiter, I told my husband, this is the job I want. And I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to get it, but this is the job I want. So that's how I stumbled into Magellan.
Wow. It's crazy how certain decisions you make throughout your career can really lead you to where you didn't know you needed to be eventually.
And if Magellan had called 20 years earlier, it would have been a different response because I had not matured professionally. And I also didn't have the life lessons to understand that I wanted both the things that are passionate projects to me to be aligned to what my career is. So, yeah.
It also makes so much sense in this industry to have people leading these types of roles that have experience in public sector, in the government, knowing how the processes and programs work, knowing where the gaps are, just makes sense. So
It literally like all fell together, I think.
mhm.
And the fact that I get to work for a company that is so mission oriented, and our mission in terms of serving the military. I mean, this is over 100-year mission for this company, and as a military spouse, that really brings it all together for me, because it's ultimately about service. And whether it be service to our nation's warfighters, our civil servants who support all the infrastructure that allows our military to do what they need to do, or service to their families, because it's really tough being a military family, it's all right there. And I couldn't be prouder of the people that I am fortunate enough to lead.
And you truly, from different perspectives and different parts of your life, know the impact of the mission that you are serving
Yes,
at Magellan.
yes.
So that's unique.
And I'm a social worker, so it truly is all of my life culminating at once. I hope that doesn't mean this is it for me, but it really feels like it has very much aligned very nicely.
At this point in your life, being the CEO of a federal contracting company that focuses on, like you said, a lot of the passions and things that have tracked it your whole life, have you exceeded expectations that you had originally set for yourself or didn't know, could be possible?
I tend to I set like 10-year goals. So I never got to this one. It happened quicker, much quicker than I thought. So when I originally went to Magellan Federal, it was to lead strategy and growth, and under a lovely, lovely CEO who decided to leave about 6 months into my term. And so then they said, would you be the interim? And that was not on my goal list yet. That was on a further down the plane piece.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it was one of those, why not take it? Yes, it's quicker than I thought, but that often those opportunities, when they're presented, even if I'm not quite totally sure, they have led me to such amazing, amazing developments in my life and in my career. So absolutely.
Yeah, that is clear after talking to you. I mean, the things and the roles that you're saying yes to off the bat, the opportunities that are presented to you and you just take, it- I'm not surprised that would come about and you would say, let's do it.
Well, and that's what, I tell younger folks as in their careers is be willing to say yes, lean into those changes. And it's okay to be scared and be intimidated. That adrenaline that you feel running, that's the adrenaline that can propel you forward into that change. And I think that, sometimes people make safe decisions. It's okay to make a calculated risk decision. And I think that's the important thing that we all have to do in life. I mean, you do that in your relationships every day. You take a calculated risk, right? And so we have to also make calculated risk and weigh out the return on investment.
Awesome. I know it's kind of hard to see the future. And like you said, this isn't the end all be all, but is there something that you're still hoping to accomplish in the near future or just something you hope to do in this role or outside of the everyday work?
Oh, I mean, I think there's so much that Magellan Federal can do and will do in the next 5 years. And I'm excited about seeing where we go and how we grow. I think we have only kind of scratched the surface of being a forward-thinking and growth-oriented company. On a personal level, I want to continue my nonprofit work, my volunteer work, because I get a lot out of that. And I think that's the natural kind of trajectory of life is we work really, really hard. And then at some point in life, maybe we retire, maybe we scale back and we do more volunteer work and we give back.
Awesome. Well, Anna, thank you. It has been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing your story with me. It has been very inspiring, and I feel a little bit more motivated at this point than I did before. Like, well, she did all these things. I got to get on it.
And if you need to know how to swim when you're 45 years old, you can still learn.
So true.
That's the beauty of it. You can still learn.
No matter what position you take on, whether you're a police officer.
Yes, absolutely. So thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thanks for listening to this episode of Humble Beginnings. Check out WashingtonExec.com to find more of our podcasts and profiles on executives. See you next time.